Good evening, folks. This is Brian Lawrence here at IndianPeaksWeather.net, and it's a windy evening here in the Front Range foothills of northeastern Colorado. We're located at about 8,200 feet here at our house, a little bit east of Nederland, but not too far. And it's a very, very windy evening. Currently at my weather station at our house, it's about 35 degrees. Not a very cold night by any stretch of the imagination, but look at this. Winds have been generally blowing from the north-northwest, anywhere sustained from 20 to 30 miles per hour. They've lightened up a little bit over the past 15 minutes, but look at the gust up to 44 miles per hour, and about an hour ago we had a gust up to 65 miles per hour. That's hurricane force winds, and it's just one of those nights. In fact, it's been one of those weekends here, long holiday weekend, and it's been windy. In fact, our bedroom is upstairs, and it can be hard to sleep at times with winds going 60, 70 miles per hour, and it makes the roof creak and groan. It makes us wonder if our house is going to stay together. And that's pretty much the weather story right now for us here in Nederland, Colorado. You can see on the radar image here from Weather Underground, there is some blue right through here. Nederland's right here. There's Boulder down the plains and Broomfield and Longmont. Nederland's here. We're about here at our house. And what we are seeing is winds are blowing from the west-northwest up and over the Continental Divide. And so on the west side of the Continental Divide, we have upslope and snows are falling right now in areas like Winter Park. But as soon as the wind blows over the divide and begins to sink down towards the plains and over us, it dries out. The moisture evaporates, and well, there's no snow, just a lot of wind. We do have a few flurries blowing around us right now outside, but it's not going to amount to anything in terms of accumulation. And February does tend to be one of our drier months. Now, the past few years here at our house, we've had some decent snowfalls in February and some good monthly totals for February, upwards of 20 to 30 inches. And a little bit more, maybe 50 inches one year, a few years ago. But normally, if you look at the long-term records for this area, February is generally pretty dry. We did have a good snowfall earlier this month around Groundhog's Day, about 2 feet of snow, and that is quickly melting now in this mild weather pattern that we're in. Quick look at the Weather Underground forecast for Nederland, Colorado over the next several days. Well, mild. That's the first thing that comes to mind when I look at that. Very, very, very mild. And you can see that over the next few days, temperatures will generally be in the mid-40s to around 50 degrees. And at our elevation for February, that's pretty darn warm. That's probably about 10 to 15 degrees above normal for this time of the year for us. And look at this. Low temperature is not getting much below freezing at all. In fact, not really getting below freezing except maybe on Thursday, and then finally this weekend maybe a little bit of a cool down in store for us at night, but daytime highs are still low to mid 40s by this weekend. No precipitation really to speak of as well as we look further down the road. Perhaps a chance of a few snow showers later Thursday night, doesn't really show here, and then again later this weekend, but no big storms on the horizon. And this is an El Nino winter. Normally in El Nino years, the springtime, March and April, and sometimes May, do bring some pretty good snows for the Front Range, including Nederland, Colorado, Boulder, Rollinsville, Estes Park Ward. We'll see what happens this year, but right now we're in a pretty dry and warm pattern here in the middle of February. So what's going on exactly? Well, let's take a look at the ECMWF. I like to look at the ECMWF because it does give a quick glance view of both what's happening at the surface of the atmosphere and what's happening in the upper levels of the atmosphere, and both are very important when it comes to forecasting weather anywhere, but especially in the Central and Southern Rockies here in Nederland. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at lots of pretty colors, right? Well, it's a little bit more than that, and stick with me. We do this a few times and you'll learn how to read these maps like a pro. So the black lines are pressure lines, isobars, lines of equal pressure. And here's a high pressure area here, 1037, high pressure over New England, the low pressure area over the Gulf Coast here over Texas near Houston. So these are the typical highs and low pressure systems that you would see on a TV weather person's map. And that's what we're usually used to looking at when it comes to weather forecasting, is that surface map that the weather person on TV shows you. And I remember that as a kid. It's way before they had the really fancy graphics on some of these weather stations. It used to be these stick-on highs and lows, and that was the weather map, and that told the weather story. Well, there's more to it than that. There's also the wind flow in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere, and that's what we're looking at here with these colors. These are actually ridges and troughs. And quite simply put, ridges, I'm showing you a ridge right here off the west coast, this area. It looks like a mountain ridge if you look at it, right there. Those are areas of warmer temperatures normally. And the troughs, again, this looks like a little bit of a valley here, right? That's where colder air tends to be. So this gives us a quick idea of where the warm and cold air masses are. And right now you can see that there's a lot of cold air, obviously, as we get into Canada up towards Hudson Bay. That's where we expect cold air to be. Colder as we go to the north, right? Yeah. And then as we go further south towards the equator, Gulf of Mexico, down Florida, warmer temperatures, higher heights. And this ridge here says that there's a fairly warm air mass right now off the California coast. And this trough says there's a cooler air mass poking into the northern tier of the U.S. And the winds in the mid-levels of the atmosphere tend to flow between the ridges and the troughs. So you can picture the winds blowing through here like this, almost parallel to these colored lines, these height lines. And that is the storm track too, coincidentally. More often than not, those winds in the mid-levels of the atmosphere steer the storms. That's key for us here in Colorado, because if we get stuck under a ridge, the storms are going to go to our north or our south. We're not going to get any precipitation here. Also, if we're stuck under a ridge, temperatures are more likely to be above normal, whereas if we're in a trough, temperatures will probably be a little bit below normal, and we have a better chance of precipitation. So keeping all that in mind, as we step forward here on the ECMWF, you can see that in general, and we're right here in Nederland in Colorado, the big square state. See the big square state? Oh, there's Nederland, Colorado. We're generally under this ridge, slightly to the eastern side of the ridge, on the northwest flow side of the ridge. And that's where we're getting a lot of these winds right now. There is a pretty good thermal gradient between cold air to our north, warm air to our south. That really intensifies the winds in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. And as those winds hit the Front Range, you can think of the Front Range of Colorado, if you're not familiar with our geography. Front Range of Colorado is a wall of mountains that goes all the way from the Wyoming border practically down to the Colorado-New Mexico border, unbroken. And when the winds coming from the west hit that wall of mountains, they get forced up and over it. And that results in precipitation usually on the west side of that mountain of the Continental Divide, such as Winter Park and areas like that, Steamboat Springs. But for Denver and the Front Range foothills, we tend to be drier and just very windy as those winds come down the east slopes of the foothills. We call those Chinook winds, and those are our famous Chinook winds. It's a form of a barrier wind, and I won't go into details of what a barrier wind is right now, but look it up, Google it. It's really interesting, and it's a big player in the weather here in eastern Colorado, especially here in Nederland. It just causes some amazing winds, and we see hurricane force winds at least a few times every winter here. And until you get used to it, it's a little bit scary sometimes. But back to our forecasts. This is going into Tuesday morning, then Wednesday morning, and keep an eye on where those ridges and troughs are. Thursday morning, and you begin to see that ridge shifting off to the east of us here in Colorado, and a trough is digging into the Pacific Northwest, Northern California. And with that, it's going to be bringing precipitation to the Sierra Nevada, some of the mountains in northern Nevada, and of course the Cascades as well. But then as we step into Friday morning, a little later this week, you can see that that trough lifts up and over us here in Colorado. Foiled again here in Colorado. Now, doesn't mean that not everybody in Colorado is going to be seeing any precipitation, because some areas will. because notice that there's a pretty direct flow of air and also implicitly moisture from the Pacific coast, from the Pacific Ocean, I should say, to Colorado. It's a pretty direct flow across the west into Colorado, and that means areas in the north central mountains, again, Steamboat Springs, some of the mountain ski areas such as Vail and the western slope of Colorado could definitely see some light snows from disturbances embedded in this flow in combination with the moisture in this flow. But it doesn't really do a whole lot for us here on the Front Range. For us, we really need upslope flow. There's no upslope flow here, and there's no storm formation in southeastern Colorado at all through this period. Instead, we're going to have more wind. I think the winds will die down a little bit. Let me show you here. We'll go back to Wednesday morning. The temperature gradient begins to die down across Colorado a little bit. We get more under the ridge, and I think the winds will die down starting Tuesday. And then definitely on Wednesday, lighter winds. No more of this hurricane force stuff that we've been seeing. But unfortunately, as this next disturbance here cuts up and over to our north, the winds are going to be back. Definitely by Thursday, and I think Friday, we're going to be seeing more of the same thing. A lot of wind, a few blow-over flurries here in Netherlands, but nothing to speak of in terms of accumulation. And as I showed you with the Weather Underground forecast, unseasonably mild temperatures. That's going to be the catchword for us for the next couple, I would say at least into early next week. So stepping forward a little bit into this coming weekend, it begins to change a little bit. And notice there's no longer a distinct ridge or trough really anywhere in the U.S. This is zonal flow. And that normally means near average temperatures, which is what we saw in the Weather Underground forecast for this coming weekend. Highs generally low to mid 40s, temperatures getting back into the mid 20s at night. It's getting to more seasonable levels, although still a little mild for this time of year. And by Sunday, we will see, we might see something here. If it decides to, yeah, there it is. Again, zonal flow. There's a little bit of ridging going on into western Canada, up through Vancouver, Whistler, and areas like that, getting back up towards the Yukon, a little bit towards Alaska. But for us, generally just zonal flow, which again could bring some moisture to the western side of the divide for sure. Not a big storm, but a few inches here and there always helps to freshen up those slopes a little bit. And then the bad news is by early next week, oh gosh, here we go again. The trough, the ridge is reestablishing itself in the west, the trough in the east. And there's just no big storms on the horizon right now for Colorado, and the horizon being into early next week. And now we're getting really far off into the future by next Tuesday, about a week out. Here we go. Again, not much in the way of storm systems for us here in Colorado. And we'll go into the middle of next week, but that's about as far as I usually like to go, is out about 8 days or so, because a lot can change in these models. And again, a little bit of ridging in the west, a little bit of trough in the east, but no big storm systems on the horizon. And then I think that's key. The weather is generally going to be very nice here over the next 7 days. Dry, no big storms to contend with. Not good news for the ski areas, but you can go down to the plains, get your bike, go for a run. It's going to be very mild down in Denver, near 70 degrees the middle of this week on the plains, around Boulder especially, right in front of the foothills, where they get the best warming from those downslope Chinook winds. It's going to be very pleasant. But just remember, winter is not over here in Colorado. And we do have March and April coming up, and both of those can have some significant precipitation and cool temperatures, especially in El Nino years. So it's definitely not over yet. This is just a little lull in the action, I think. I think by early March, the pattern is going to begin to change a little bit for us. Definitely by the middle of March, we'll begin to see some pretty good storms pushing into the west coast. But that's just what I think. All right, so just to recap, again, looking at the Weather Underground forecast, I think it's on target pretty much. We're looking at mild temperatures, dry and mild conditions right on through this week, the balance of it. Cooling off slightly by Saturday and Sunday, but no big cold Arctic outbreaks and no big snowstorms on the horizon. So thank you very much for joining me this evening on IndianPeaksWeather.net, and we'll be talking soon. Have a good night, and I hope the beginning of the week is good for you.